I'm Nikki, the Obsessive Bookseller. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about my challenges for 2022 and projects, and I'm going to let you know how I've done. At the beginning of the year, I set myself a bunch of reading goals, things I wanted to kind of focus on this year. And for the most part, I met my goals. And most importantly, this was kind of an intangible goal that I didn't really declare too much, but I wanted to focus on just the best books first this year. Really focus on high priority titles. I have a tendency to just go with whatever's available right now at the library as opposed to the ones that I think like, oh, I really can't wait to read that. I don't know what it is about myself that I avoid reading the best books first, but yes, this year, looking back on my Goodreads reading history, I have read a lot of amazing titles and I am really thrilled with my progress. But for the numbers wise, let's go over the goals that I had for myself. On Goodreads the last couple of years, I've been averaging about 80 books a year. That's pretty good. That's comfortable reading for me with kids and a full-time job, all of the things I've got going on. And I think after all the dust settles at the end of the month, I'm going to be at about 105 out of 80, which is awesome. Next year, I might feel comfortable setting my goal back up to 100. I haven't been at 100 in a few years. And really, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. But that's 100 books of quality that I read. There were a couple of duds in there, but for the most part, I basically liked most of the things I picked up this year. It was very selective. I wanted to physically read 20 books. That may not seem like a lot, especially comparatively to other booktubers, but I went through an eye strain injury a couple of years ago, and I'm still recovering. There was a point where I was exclusively on audiobooks, but slowly over the last couple of years, I've tried to integrate physical reading time back into my daily habits. And my goal this year was 20 books. I came in at 20. More importantly than the number count, I am finding myself spending time physically reading at least once a day, and that is really important to me. And I've noticed, especially over the last 6 months, as opposed to the first half of the year, the amount of time I'm spending on physical books is increasing significantly. So I'm going to set a little bit of a higher goal next year. I'm pretty sure I'm including that challenge again. A lot of the content that I'm consuming are ARCs, upcoming releases, and then a bunch of backlists that don't even have audio options. So kind of bouncing between old and new. And I find that very motivating to keep going. It keeps things interesting. It's been a lot of fun. I wanted to reread 4 series. Specifically, I picked out the ones that I wanted to reread, and I had 13 books total I wanted to get to. I read 2 of 13, and that was a big bust. There's just way too many things I want to explore, and so as much as I would love to go back and reread some series, it's just not something I am enjoying doing. I have not decided if I want to include this challenge next year, because it's not that I failed, it's that I epically failed. I obviously am not interested in pursuing that. We'll see. Owned audiobooks. I have this massive collection of audiobooks. I talk about it constantly. All of those Audible sales, I end up picking up entire series of things. I pick up anything I think I might want to read eventually. So many titles, and I've had max membership for as many years as I can remember. It's a lot of books. And so my goal is to read more of the books that I actually paid money for and stop using my library so much. But this year, my goal was 30, which is about 30% of my reading. I read about 100 books a year. And I came in at 21 out of 30. Yeah, that's not very good. That's not even half of my reading as books that I already own. So I'm definitely going to need to focus more on that next year. I am almost positive I picked up at least 5 times more than that this year. Like, I bought over 100 audiobooks and only read 20. Like, I'm good at math, but evidently not when it comes to books. Owned physical copies. I want to read more books that I actually own. Books that I paid money for and invested in. I want to read more of those. This year I had a goal of reading 30 books, and I am coming in at a pretty 38 out of 30 books. Yes! I'm super excited about that. Historically, the books that I physically own get last priority. Something about them always being there is a sense of comfort, and I don't make a concerted effort to get to them, which is such a weird thing. But 2 things have been working in my favor. My Read, Burn, Hoard project, that has forced me to go through my titles and pay special attention to the books that I own, and I've been having a ton of fun with that project. So I read a few for that, and then I started buying books, high priority books that I really want to explore, mostly new releases, and a few from my count comes from those. I'm very pleased with 38 out of 30. I'm thinking my goal might be upwards of, like, I want half my reading next year. to be from books that I own, but we'll get into that more when I do my 2023 challenges video sometime in January. That's how I did with the challenges. And actually, I got through saying at the beginning of the video that I thought I did really well, but I have 4 challenges that I'm measuring, and of that, I've only done 2 well out of the 4. What I have done well, I've done really well, so kudos. Okay, so let's talk about what types of books I've been reading. What's the breakdown of genres? I read a lot of nonfiction this year, a lot more than I normally have. I've found my subset of genre. I really love organization and productivity books, and I've just been devouring everything that I can get my hands on. And I find they are really good for breaking up heavier fantasy novels. So I'll read a really dense fantasy novel throughout the day, and at some point I hit burnout. And picking up a nonfiction, something totally, completely different, like sparks my interest, and immediately I'm engaged again. It's a good refresh. But yes, I have read 16 nonfiction books this year, which comes in at 15% of my total reading. Like, that's wild to me. 10 years ago, if you had asked me if I would read that many books in a year of nonfiction over fantasy novels, I would have said no way. Now that's 15% of the total books that I read. As far as word count goes, though, it's significantly lower. I bet you it's only about 5% of my total time invested into books. So the numbers are a bit skewed in that regard. Young adult and middle grade. I read 15 titles this year, which comes in at about 14%. That's a lot more than I thought, and I have been making a more concerted effort to pay more attention to that side of my collection because it's a full third of my library at this point, so I figured I either need to read them or let them go. Fantasy. Easily my favorite category. I read 41 books, and that is a total of 39% of my entire reading. This is my home. This is my staple genre, so I'm not surprised to see that as high up as it is. And like I said before, I think the page count comparison is a bit higher. It's probably over 50%. But yes, that is a stat that I would like to see stay consistent into next year. Like at least half of my reading being fantasy, and then everything else is just kind of rotation and supplemental. Science fiction, I read 18, which comes in at 17. And 18's okay. I had hoped to have read a little bit more, but I did start my project sci-fi halfway through the year, and that's where the bulk of my reading came from. Now, it's not the type of hard sci-fi that I think most BookTube viewers are interested in hearing about. Most of the books I read are very much my kind of sci-fi, which is like very space opera-y, essentially like urban fantasies, but set in space. I really love that. Next year, I want to start exploring a little bit more of the classics, digging into the genre a little deeper than I have been. But yes, I would very much call my taste in sci-fi fluff. But I am open to exploring more. I think I've read enough of the fluff that I want a little more depth. That's not to say that some of the fluff hasn't been solid 5-star reads for me. Like Children of Time, oh my gosh, I loved it. And I wouldn't call that fluff necessarily, but I would not also call it hard sci-fi. It's more space opera-y. Anyway, I'm okay with 17%, but I think I'd like it to be a full quarter of what I read next year. Urban fantasy, I read 7 titles, coming in at 7%, and I'm most disappointed in that number. I feel like as much as I love the genre and as many books as I have to explore, I want to be reading more. I also started Project Urban Fantasy as a vlog series, but have not published any videos on it yet. I lost some footage, that was a problem. I have also been picking up urban fantasies for other projects, so I didn't feel okay duplicating my vlogging from one project to the other, so it didn't get included. But going into 2023, I would like to see that number go up to about 20% of my reading. I just love the genre, it's so much fun. And I don't see a lot of other fantasy booktubers talking about urban fantasy, and it's a subgenre that I'm really passionate about, so I would like to consume more content and share with y'all which ones are worth reading or not. And that's basically it with all the goals that I had set. I've been keeping track of everything in my bullet journal over the course of the entire year, and I actually used this throughout the whole year. Normally when I set a layout like this, I use it for a month or two and then never go back to it, but yeah, this has been wildly useful and helping me see how I've been keeping up on my goals. You'll see audiobooks, like a big gap there. That's no good. I set myself a goal of reading 80 books, and as you can see, I completed that and actually ran out of room to write everything on there. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I did have a goal of reading 10 nonfiction this year, and so 16, like, really happy with that. Now let's talk about the projects. I've mentioned this before. 3 or 4 months ago, I decided I wanted to make a more concerted effort to get to some of these subgenres, and I thought I would make a project out of it. So I compiled a list of everything I was interested in on a bookshelf on Goodreads, which I'll link the applicable ones in the description. And I had 3. I wanted to do Project Sci-Fi, Project YA, and Project Urban Fantasy. Project Urban Fantasy, I've not reported on anything for it yet. So I've got a lot of content planned coming for 2023, but yeah, as of now, that one's kind of a wash. Even though I have read a few urban fantasies, I've not read anything for the project, if that makes sense. Okay, Project YA was a little more successful. Book Club ended up picking this one outside of the project, but I kind of included it and did a review for it anyway, but it's The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. I devoured this entire trilogy plus the prequel, and it's one of my now all-time favorite things. I love this so much. It's going to make my top list for 2022. The series was so good. It brings back all the nostalgia from reading books as a kid, but it's told in a sophisticated enough manner to be accessible to adults. The footnotes are everything. It's hilarious. There are so many like subtle jokes in there. Not so subtle jokes, like everything landed for me. I was absolutely delighted by this entire thing. Can't recommend it highly enough. And then per rotation, I also picked up Dragon Lair by Elizabeth Hayden, book 3 in the Ven Polytheme series. And part of the project is also to help me get through some of the books that I've been stalling on reading for a while for whatever reason, mostly because YA and middle grade aren't my focus. And actually, both of these are middle grade as opposed to the YA project aspect, but I'm kind of lumping them all together. But this one was okay, a little bit too much talk and not enough adventure for me. And then when they finally did go on the adventure, it kind of like glossed over the really cool parts and didn't spend enough time enmeshed in it. But it was a fun story. What I took away from it was just the highlights, and it was a quick enough read that that's okay. So probably a 3 out of 5 star for that one overall. And then kickstarting the Project YA process, I picked a book out of a jar, and it ended up being Paranormalcy by Kirsten White. And this was a major bust. First one out of the gate, and did not like it. Every single tropey thing that you hate about YA was present here. Insta-love, and an insta-love that didn't even make sense. Like, oh, here's someone who's not appealing in the slightest, but he's hot, so let's just see if we can pursue that and put ourselves in danger. The biggest draw to this book for me was the world building aspect. Like, she's in an institution that kind of hunts down and tracks supernatural beings, keeps tabs on them, if you will, and rounds up the bad ones and imprisons them. And she's in this institution that trains people to do that, but that was not explored at all. In fact, if you ask me about the setting of this institution, all I can tell you is that there are a lot of white walls and not a lot else. Very thinly done. And then she takes a different direction outside of that. That was just very high school drama. Didn't like it at all. And what's more, it focuses a lot on the Fae, and of all the supernatural creatures she could have focused on, that would be my least favorite aspect. So I've been having a debate on whether or not I want to continue the series at all, because I just did not enjoy this one in the slightest. So that's what happened with Project YA. I'm hoping to do a few more next year, but I think like one every quarter or so would be like a pretty good, in fact, I might plan on that, doing one Project YA set per quarter and maybe reading the entire series instead of just bouncing around between books. I think I can live with that. Project Sci-Fi, however, was a lot more successful. I did 3 episodes of that and read a total of 6 books plus a couple of short stories. And by far the highlight was Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, we also picked this one for Patreon Book Club, so I got to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But this book, spoiler alert, is in contention for my favorite read of the entire year. I loved it so much so that I went out and hunted down a hardcover, and it's like this beautiful edition, signed. Like, I loved it that much. Paid astronomical shipping for this thing. Everything about this book worked for me. I love the biological aspect of it. I love the like deep connection to these characters, even non-human characters like giant spiders. Who would have thought? And I thought the momentum of the book was perfect, and I loved the ending. So everything about this worked for me. So Project Sci-Fi started out with a bang. I finished out the Beldam Apocrypha series by Cameron Hurley. This is book 3. I did this one plus a couple of short story collections. and it did not end particularly well for me. It kind of just petered out. The first book was by far the most interesting and the strongest, and she had such a cool framework for this world where there were things that were just on the periphery where you're like, I really want to know more about that, but that's not even the focus of the story. Like, that's how awesome of a world she created. But my problem is she never actually went there and explored those things. I want to know more about how the people got to this planet and how they've remained isolated. And there's so many aspects of the world building that I wanted more of. I also wanted the character to kind of go somewhere. And I feel like there was a good internal growth, but there wasn't a lot of external changes. I don't know. Overall, I think I'm giving the series a 3-star. It's definitely like one of the most gruesome, gut-punching things that I've read. Visceral. Not gruesome, visceral. But yes, did that one. Read The Last Emperor, finishing out the Interdependency series by John Scalzi. The first book was just okay. The second book, wow, loved that one. This one to me was a colossal waste of pages. It's basically reiteration and recap and just filler until you get to the last 10%, and then stuff started happening and it was a really good ending. So I really feel like you could have cut out the last little bit of this and plunked it into the end of book 2 and been just fine. But yet another series that I've finished out and probably wouldn't have picked up had it not been for Project Sci-Fi, so loving that. Picked up Weight of Command by Michael Mamet, one of my favorite sci-fi writers. This one was a lot of fun. This girl kind of is forced into command long before she's ready due to some circumstances outside of her control, and watching her try to build a tribe of people that she can trust and kind of navigate the politics of everything and deal with the mystery of the plot. All of that was incredibly satisfying. I enjoyed that one thoroughly. I read Semiosis by Sue Burke and did not like this one at all. Children of Time got me all fired up about the really biologically heavy science fiction. I love the concepts of that. I love creature creation. And in fact, world building doesn't get any better than a cool alien world to explore. But I feel like after the prologue and the first chapter, everything kind of went downhill from there. It was like a multi-generational story. I didn't have any connection to any of the characters. I didn't like the execution of it. I didn't like the story. I didn't like the focus. The alien aspect of it ended up sounding more like a AI to me than a biological creature, and that bothered me a bit because I felt like I was reading just yet another spaceship story where the AI kind of wants to take over and control everything. So that one was not very successful for me, and I've since donated it. I read Home, a short story by Martha Wells set in the Murderbot world from a character we have not gotten a perspective from yet, I don't believe. And I liked it as a really valuable little 10-page short story. I wish I had read it where it came timeline-wise within the Murderbot series, but I'm glad I read it. I thought it was something new, so I was like, oh, new Murderbot, and read it, and like, no, this is not new. And finally, I read Sins of Our Fathers, book 9.5 in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, and it's essentially a short story that takes place after the end of the series. And the end of the series left me wanting a little bit. Came away a bit unsatisfied with some of the unanswered questions for me. I had very specific things that I was hoping to get a payoff on that never came. And I was hoping this short story would provide that, but it didn't end up doing that. But what it did do is it was a brilliant character study that somehow managed to be completely unrelated from everything we had read up to that point, but still having all that rich depth of history of all the things we'd been through in the series and bringing that all to a focus and narrowing it down back to the human level, the basics of their writing that I love so much, that connection, the ramifications of everything and how it's going to affect everything going forward. Like, I got a lot of insight and like profoundness out of this little short story, and it reminded me why I liked the series to begin with. So while I'm still unhappy with one aspect of the resolution of everything, at least I ended the series, the last thing I read from it reminded me of that humanity aspect of their writing that I love so much. So, very positive experience for me. Really love that one. So that's all I have for you. I love setting goals. I love working towards things. I could have done a little bit better this year, but I also didn't really let the goals dictate my reading too much. I let it influence it, but I basically read what I felt like reading, and so Yeah, next year though, I definitely want to get to more urban fantasy. I feel like the only reason I didn't this year is because I have so many outstanding series, things I want to read, and I didn't feel like I had the time to focus on those other ones, but I'm going to make the time. Thanks so much for joining me for this recap. I want to know how you did on your goals this year. Any epic fails or epic wins? I'd love to hear about it. Thanks again, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.